In the recent Major League Fishing event on Toledo Bend Reservoir, Dustin Connell lapped the field by finding a clear water creek with some dirty water runoff that brought in shad and a pile of pre-spawn bass. In this video, I'm going to explain how Dustin found this winning area and how you can replicate this on your home lake to get an advantage over the fish and your competition. Let's get into it. Toledo Bend is a massive lowland reservoir in Texas. Its size makes it daunting to figure out which small creek is holding the most bass on any given day. Despite this, Dustin Connell was able to isolate a small creek that was less than a mile long that was holding a ton of big pre-spawn bass. There's a lot of factors that led Dustin to this creek, and I want to walk you through them so you understand his full thought process so you can replicate it on your lake. First, let's understand the conditions the anglers were facing during this event. Before the tournament, the water was relatively stable, both in water clarity and in water level. However, there was a lot of rain the week before the tournament, which rose water levels and also made the lake a lot dirtier throughout. A lot of the creeks had a lot of dirty water runoff, and there was very muddy water throughout much of the upper end of the lake. There were still a few pockets of clear water on the lower end, and over the first few days of competition, a lot of anglers were congregated in the mouths of creeks on the lower end that still had clear water in them. Interestingly, most of the top finishers were using the same technique, which is targeting these clear water creeks with their forward-facing sonar using Damiki rigs. They were targeting fish that were chasing shad in anywhere from 20 to 50 feet of water, and 9 out of the top 10 finishers used this technique throughout the event. What's interesting is that even though most of the anglers were using the exact same technique, Dustin Connell was able to lap the field because he found a unique area that was very different from the other anglers in the top 10. On the final day of competition, while the majority of the leaders from the first few days were targeting main lake areas that still had clear water, Dustin chose to fish a small creek close to takeoff. This creek was unique because it was one of the few creeks in the midsection of Toledo Bend that still had clear water in it, and we can see this in the water clarity maps in the Deep Dive app. Taking a closer look at this creek, you can also see that there are a lot of water inflow points that flow into the back of it. The championship round was on a Sunday, but the day before on Saturday there was a lot of rain in the area. This brought fresh water into all of these water inflow points you can see in the Deep Dive app, and this caused the shad that were sitting more towards the mouth of this pocket and creek to push into the creek. This also brought bass back into this creek as well. If you look at the live coverage, you'll see that Dustin Connell is fishing a lot shallower than the other anglers on this final day. Most of his fish were coming in that 15 to 25 foot of water range, where a lot of the other anglers were fishing 40 to 50 feet deep. The reason the fish in Dustin's area were shallower is because of all the warm water runoff that came into this creek. This wasn't the only creek with runoff though, but the important thing to note is that this creek still had clear water in it, while a lot of the other creeks around it had very stained or dirty water. This meant that runoff didn't blow out the creek and turn the entire thing into chocolate milk. There was just enough stain and just enough new nutrients coming into this creek to bring those bait fish in and bring those bass in, but still allow Dustin to target those fish with his forward-facing sonar and with that Damiki rig. This made the area Dustin was fishing very unique and almost one of a kind, even on a lake as big as Toledo Bend. If the creek was any larger, that water coming into the creek wouldn't have as much of an effect, so the fact that he was fishing this shorter creek definitely helped concentrate those bait fish into a smaller zone, making them easier to pick off. Also, again, because the water was relatively clear in that creek, it didn't get blown out by that rain, and it was the perfect balance of fresh water runoff, slightly stained water, the concentration of nutrients into a small zone, and a bunch of pre-spawn bass that allowed Dustin to catch a pile of fish and absolutely dominate the final day. To give you guys a better idea of the process Dustin was using to find these fish, using 2D sonar, side imaging, down imaging, as well as forward-facing sonar, I want to show you a clip from a video last year where I caught fish on Beaver Lake in Arkansas using the exact same techniques that Dustin was using on Toledo Bend to really give you a full perspective on how you can replicate this pattern on your lake. Today we're on Beaver Lake in Arkansas. The bass are transitioning into their pre-spawn patterns, and water temperatures are in the mid-40s. The water is rising due to some warm rains we've had over the past few days, bringing in some runoff into the backs of major creeks. Today I want to target the backs of some of these creeks where some dirtier water is mixing with clearer water. I used the new water clarity feature in the Deep Dive app to identify a few key creeks that had some dirty water runoff. The hope is that this dirty, warm water is going to attract bait fish, and those bait fish are going to draw the bass into that mixing water. After choosing a creek, I started about 2/3 of the way back, right before the clear water started to transition to more stained water. My plan is to graph from this clear water section all the way to the back of this creek where there's more stained, warmer water in the hopes of finding some bait fish and bass.
Now, because I don't know where the fish are in this creek, I need to graph pretty much everywhere. I'm going to start by graphing out in the center of the creek, looking for bait fish that might be suspended out here over deeper water. We're in the beginning of February, so the bass should be transitioning into their pre-spawn patterns pretty soon, but there may be some leftover fish out here in the center of these creeks that are in their winter patterns. But as you can see, there's literally nothing on the down imaging screen, nothing on side imaging right now. Doesn't mean that they're not out here, but I am going to start by graphing out here first because this is where the fish have been. I'm not going to get caught up though on if the fish are in their winter patterns, pre-spawn patterns, anything like that yet. I'm going to keep an open mind and just graph literally everything. So as we can see here, I'm now making my way more towards one of these secondary creeks that are in the back of this creek, and there is a rounded point here with some standing timber, these secondary points you can see here on the screen, and I'm basically just going to graph over to these trees and to the secondary point and see if I can find fish suspended around those. Honestly, all I'm looking for when I get to one of these creeks is a sign of life, whether that's some type of bait fish, some fish suspended anywhere, and once I kind of get a sense for what depth the fish are in, I can make a better determination of whether I need to fish offshore or if I can actually fish up shallow and get some fish to bite. Ooh, there we go, guys. There's something on the screen. Got a little brush pile mixing with these standing trees. Not seeing any bait fish or fish around that timber or around the brush pile there, but that's definitely something interesting to point out. And I'm actually going to mark that brush pile just for future case. Just drop a little brush icon there because I might want to come check that out in case I figure out that they're loaded in brush. You're not always going to see the fish in those brush piles when they're stacked up in them. So times you might need to come back and just fish whatever brush you can find. So we'll mark that just in case we get on a brush pile bite, and I can come check that later, but not gonna stop and fish it right away because again, I haven't seen the bait fish. In general, when I'm out here graphing, guys, I'm looking for schools of fish. I don't wanna look for individual fish to start out my day. Fish in brush piles are usually gonna be more individualistic just by themselves, and you're gonna have to hit a bunch of those brush piles to get fish in the boat. So it's always good to mark where they are, kind of get a sense for what's happening, but you're not gonna get too caught up on fishing them. I'm gonna start by looking for those bigger groups of fish. And I'm also paying attention to what's going on the side imaging in terms of other types of cover and structure. Again, we have a lot of brush right there, and we actually just came over a big school of crappie down there in 40 feet of water. Now that's interesting. That's our first sign of actual life. This is not a school of bass, which is what we're out here looking for, but if we take a look at the 2D sonar, you can see that we have some very small, barely visible arches on that 2D sonar with tiny dots on the down imaging, and that just lets me know based on my settings that I'm looking at crappie. These are all crappie, and honestly guys, if I wanted to catch crappie right now, we would be in business. And the reason, again, I can tell they're crappie is just by the size of those dots and also how many fish are stacked on top of each other. Crappie are going to stack 10 to 20 fish tall on down imaging and on 2D sonar, where bass won't stack more than 2 to 3 fish on top of each other. They're also going to give off a lot stronger return, a big dot or a big arch, and that's because of the settings I have on this fish finder. I have sonar settings guides for all the fish finders that I use on my boat, Humminbird, Lowrance, and Garmin, on my website, fishthemoment.com. If you want my exact settings, I tune my settings so that I can differentiate species of fish. That's super critical, knowing if you're looking at crappie, if you're looking at bass, or whatever you're looking at. And as we can see here, there's a bunch of crappie right there, but that's not what we're looking for. It was interesting though, here's another brush pile actually coming up on the screen as we're talking. It is interesting that those fish were down there pretty deep. They're in that 30 to 40 foot range. And because they're crappie, I don't know if that's an indication if that's where the bass are as well. I'm not seeing any bass on the down imaging or 2D sonar right now. I've just seen the crappie. So we're gonna have to keep looking, keep searching. But now that we've seen crappie in here, we at least know there's a sign of life. So hopefully we'll find some bass here soon. Oh, there we go, guys. That's our first bait ball up there in 20 feet of water, suspended out in the center of this creek channel. And then we just found another bait ball as well. Now we're getting into it. This is what I've been looking for. That bait fish is a little bit higher in the water column than the fish I've been seeing. So it's definitely setting up in that 10 to 15 foot zone, which might mean that I need to be fishing in that 10 to 15 foot zone in this creek, or it might mean I need to be fishing down the bank in 10 to 15 feet. I'll switch over to down scan to show you what those bait balls look like. You can actually see it. There's a fish on the far left side of the screen right here. I'll mark it. It is sitting in that little channel, and I've seen a couple of those fish down there on the bottom. There's actually another one over here on the bottom. It's so weird. If I switch over to my split view, you can see that there's a fish. I don't know if it's a bass, I don't know what it is, but I have seen days where those bass will sit on the bottom underneath these bait balls and then pop up off the bottom. It's a really weird deal, but we're definitely around the bait fish now, and there are definitely fish right here. There's another one underneath this bait. Honestly, what I think I need to be doing is, and I think that is not a fish that you see there on the screen. There's like racing buoys or something out here. That is not a fish. But there's definitely bait fish out there in that little center of that cut. I'm gonna keep graphing for just a little bit more, but if I don't see anything else interesting like that, I might go back and try to fish around those bait balls and see if I can get some of those fish that were setting up tight to the bottom to actually bite. Because again, I have found fish like that before, and they have been big ones. So we're gonna just graph here for just a couple more minutes just to make sure we don't see anything that just jumps off the screen at us, but I think that looked pretty good to me. Okay, wow, this is why you do not stop graphing too soon, guys. I just came across a massive pile of shad out here in the mouth of one of these creeks. This is crazy. The screen is just all shad. The side scan shows there's a couple of little stumps and stuff down there as well. We have gotten into the shad. It's like we were in this one part of the creek. I'll switch over to the view with my mapping. We were in one part of the creek for a while and graphed a pretty good ways. We started kind of up here where those waypoints are on the top right side, and we saw no bait fish at all, but now we're getting into the bait fish like crazy, and there are several stumps and just different little pieces of timber and things out here that these fish could be positioning on. And given how much bait is back in the back of this creek, I definitely feel like there's water that ran into this creek and the bait fish followed that water that was coming in. I do need to figure out where these fish are setting up. I've seen some of these fish that are just kind of out here suspended on the bottom, or sitting on the bottom, or kind of chasing around these bait fish just a little bit. But I may need to also just go and fish down some of these rocky channel swing banks, or around the brush pile like you see right here. That could also be a pretty good little deal. And if I mark that brush pile, that might be a spot we can find some fish. But basically what I'm gonna do is just kind of move around this area, looking with my Livescope here now and seeing what I can see in terms of what the fish are doing, if I can find any individual fish, or if I can find some good cover that bass might be sitting around to ambush these bait fish, like the brush pile I just marked. There's also another little log or brush pile off on the left side of the boat here that looks pretty interesting. Not probably deep enough to hold fish, but I'm gonna mark it anyways and just go look at it. And I'm just going to take a look at all these interesting little pieces of cover back in here, because a lot of times you're not gonna see giant groups of fish in areas like this on your side imaging and down imaging in this time of the year. What you'll find is that their bass are going to be setting up really tight to cover, and you won't even notice them on your fish finder other than when you drop the Livescope, or if you're really good at looking for those fish on the bottom that I showed earlier. So we are going to drop that Livescope, get around some of these bait balls, and see if we can get some of these fish to bite. It's interesting because there are a lot of shad here just out in front of the boat, but there are no bass setting up around them. I've seen A couple fish that are pushing closer to the bottom, but not very many. I mean, I'm not seeing much activity out here at all offshore, which is not the end of the world, because that means I probably just need to be fishing again, either up shallower or around an isolated target. And whenever I get out here offshore, ooh, there's some fish. I literally, as I say that, I have some fish that pop up on the screen. It look like some good ones too. I'm gonna try to get my Damiki rig over there. Don't know if I hit the cast. Those are some decent fish. Oh, got him. There we go. I was literally saying that I didn't have fish in this area, and then as soon as I was saying that, that's why you got to be patient, guys. You can't just jump to conclusions right away. I almost completely missed these fish because I was too worried. Oh my gosh, it's a good one. Was too worried about trying to go shallow or change what I'm doing, but a lot of times you have to keep it simple. Don't overcomplicate things. Basically just find the bait fish, and as soon as you find those bait fish, just start fishing around that area. And I mean, man, that was pretty instantaneous. I tried to fish for some of those random fish, which could have been bass that were just out there on the bottom, but in that spot in particular, there were 4 or 5 fish grouped up underneath the bait balls, and that is a nice largemouth, a really good Beaver Lake fish, honestly. And if I could have 5 of those in the tournament, you'd be doing really well this time of year. Got that on the old Damiki rig, Megabass Hasdong 4-inch little swim bait. You see me catching on this recently, and it is a great little bait. Beautiful fish though right there. Let's get a weight on that guy. 2 pounds 11 ounces, almost a 3-pounder. I'm gonna lock that in just in case we get 5, just for my own personal curiosity, because beaver is not the easiest lake to fish, but if you can adapt to the conditions, pay attention to what's happening around you. Again, water's coming into the back of this creek, which should be pushing shad back into these creeks. Didn't know the fish were gonna be here, so just basically came in here blind and used my electronics, used my instincts, and put a fish in the boat within less than an hour of fishing. So that is a nice one to start the day. We're gonna catch a lot more of those, so let's keep getting after it. Beautiful fish, let's get him back down in the lake. Here we go, that's what I'm talking about, boys. And what you're looking for is that right there. You can see, instead of just the bait, there is an isolated fish that's swimming up underneath the bait ball. And basically there's another big fish right there on the bottom. There's another one swimming right there in front of the boat. Ooh, they're all over right here. I need to try to get a bait down there. Oh my gosh. You can see them so clear on that blue color palette. The brush pile looks awful, but the bass look really good. And basically what I'm trying to do is just get my bait in front of them, which is not always the easiest thing to do. And I'm trying to reel my bait right over to him. Got him, there we go. Ooh, that's a big one. That's a big one. You saw that fish, that was a big dot on that Livescope. He was right almost around that brush pile, but he wasn't in the brush, up underneath those bait balls. That's a good fish right there, guys. I mean, you cannot complain about that in the wintertime on Beaver Lake, tough lake. They are absolutely getting all over it. That fish is spotted up, and he was right there on that Livescope and choked the Damiki rig. I mean, that is an absolutely deadly bait, just a little snack for those fish. They cannot stand it. And that is another just absolutely solid fish out here on Beaver in February. Another 2 pound 10 ounce fish, same size as the last one. He felt a little bit bigger. I changed rods because I had my line break on me while I was messing with the last fish. So felt a little bit bigger than it actually is, but still a 2 3/4 pounder. I am not going to complain about a beautiful fish like that, just absolutely fat and healthy. Been feeding up on all those shad, and you saw the whole process of how I found those shad and just got around them with the Livescope and put them in the boat. It is an awesome way to catch them. Beautiful fish right there, guys. Again, super healthy. Let's get them back down the lake. There are a bunch of fish down there. I want to keep catching them because this is so much fun. And I don't know why they eat this Damiki rig so well. It's literally just a straight tail swim bait. And that Megabass Hasdong is my new favorite little bait on there. I've tried a bunch of them. I just like how active that tail is. And I don't know, I've just had a lot of confidence in it recently. Throwing on a 3/8 ounce ball head. This is a 4x4 tackle, screw lock, ball head. I'll link all this stuff down in the description for you guys. But I want to get another one here. Got my boat on spot lock, so let's see if we can get in there with these fish. Okay guys, so I'm starting to get this pattern dialed in a little bit. What I figured out so far is that I need to be finding those bait fish in close proximity to the isolated pieces of cover I marked with my side imaging. It seems like the bass are holding in those isolated laydowns and brush piles I marked, and they're not coming out of those areas until the bait fish swim right over the top of that cover. So what I'm doing is following the schools of bait fish around with the Livescope, waiting until the bait fish are over the top of the laydowns and top of the brush. There's a laydown right over here you can see over my shoulder. And basically, I'm just trying to intercept the bass and the bait fish when they kind of meet at that critical point where the bait, the brush, the bass are all in one spot. You can usually see them feeding up really well there when all three factors come together. And I'm just throwing that Damiki rig over there and they're sucking it up before I can even see them eat it half the time. So really good pattern we have going. And this is something I think I can replicate on any of these isolated pieces of cover if I keep following the shad. Got it. There we go. Saw that fish as well on the Livescope. I kind of had to blind cast over to him. There's another laydown just off the bank. These fish are pushing kind of shallow, honestly, and they're still biting. Ooh, that's a good one. Still biting the Damiki rig, even though these fish are, you can see they're pretty close to the bank. So, oh man, what do I got? This is a good one. They're not that deep by any means. That's a really good one. Oh my gosh. They're sitting up here in 10, 12 feet of water. That is a Beaver Lake stud right there. Get over here, fish. Oh, that's what I'm talking about right there. Now that's the size fish we've been looking for, and he absolutely ate that Damiki rig. Oh my goodness, look at that fish. That is a solid 3.5 to 4 pound largemouth, and I honestly didn't even watch that fish eat the bait. I just saw him on the Livescope, pitched over to a general area. There's a literal tree, a laydown that's sitting on the bank. I'm fishing here, like literally casting distance from the bank, but I'm looking at those fish follow the shad around these laydowns, brush piles, standing timber, all that stuff, and you can get that little swim bait around them. They are choking it. There we go, guys. 3 pounds, 9 ounces. Beautiful fish right there. If we lock that in, have a total of 8 pounds, 13 ounces for those 3 fish. I didn't save the Kentucky in there just because it was a little guy. But that is a beautiful fish on the Damiki rig. And we only been fishing for 2 hours, guys. Came back to this creek because of the runoff. Found the shad with the down imaging, found these isolated targets with side imaging, marked them, and now using the Livescope to put them in the boat. Beautiful fish right there. Let's get him back down in the lake, let him go. Man, there we go, that's what I'm talking about. So one thing to call out, guys, is that I'm catching these fish with Livescope, and a lot of people always ask me, can you make videos catching these fish without Livescope? And yes, I definitely could come out here and catch these same fish without Livescope, but it's going to be a lot less consistent, and it's going to be a lot more time consuming. Basically, what you would do to catch these fish without the Livescope is to come out here, do the exact same process I did at the beginning, graph with your side imaging, with your down imaging, find the bait fish, find the cover. Then you're just gonna have to hit these isolated targets by lining up with them with either waypoints or a marker buoy or something like that, and throwing a jerk bait or maybe even the same Damiki rig over these isolated targets. The problem with that is you're not gonna know exactly where those isolated targets are, so you're gonna have to waste a few casts on either side of the spot to get right where the fish are. And also, you don't know where the fish are in general, and you don't know also if the bait fish are around that piece of cover. So you have to guess on the timing in terms of when those pieces of cover are gonna have shad around them, when the bass are actively feeding, and you're also going to have to waste time missing casts. So because I only come out here filming for 2 to 3 hours, it's not always the most efficient or the best way for me to catch them by going out here without Livescope. I use Livescope to improve my efficiency, but regardless of whether I have Livescope or not, if I'm not fishing around the fish, it doesn't really matter. So the critical step in all of this, guys, is to use your side imaging and down imaging first. Find the fish like I did, then you can still catch them. It's just I'm gonna catch more fish with the Livescope than I am without it, so that's why I use it. But again, if you wanna catch fish in the wintertime using the same technique, just follow the first part of this video with the regular sonars and you can still put them in the boat. Well guys, that was an awesome couple hours of fishing here on Beaver Lake. Hopefully you enjoyed this video where I showed you the full process of breaking down the back half of a creek in the early pre-spawn and catching them on the Damiki rig. I'm gonna be making a full dedicated video about the Damiki rig and all my gear and everything like that coming to the Fish Moment channel very soon, so make sure to subscribe so you don't miss that upcoming video. Thanks for checking out this video. We'll see you on the next one.